that the way these rich Arab countries are dealing with the problem, just dumping their kids to American universities and hoping that would solve everything. He told him back in 1983. Anwar Ibrahim says, with the wealth that they had, could not they have concentrated on building the infrastructure from the bottom up? So this is one of the views which was, the feeling which was got by Anwar Ibrahim, that he wanted the Arabs to just make their own educational system workable, so that they will not depend on other countries. And this is a great concern of an active Islamic scholar, an Islamic warrior, whatever we call him, or a guerrilla scholar, as some people call him. So, but this is the real concern which he had, and obviously such advice continues to fall on deaf ears, but he thinks that Anwar Ibrahim also thinks that this was not heeded, this advice of Epistemology Farooqi. He was not angry young man, but along with Edward Said, he represents modernist school in the Arab thought. So he was not also young, angry young Arab, but he was an intellectual. He was representing intellectual tradition. Now, Edward Said, he was also Palestinian Christian, and Hussein Nasr. So he has been equated with Edward Said, and sometimes he goes beyond the limitations of Edward Said that is mentioned by people. However, he did not share Said's highly charged conspiratorial outlook regarding the problem of Palestine, nor say the visceral anti-Western bias of contemporaries such as Naqib Atas. So these are very great scholars. One is from the Christian world, and second is from Islamic world, Malaysia, Naqib Atas. And we should know that the first person who has used the terminology of Islamic knowledge was Naqib Atas. Although it was long back mentioned by Maulana Maudud in his book Ta'limat, that was mentioned by him also, but basically this term in English was used by Naqib Atas. Although his approach was different from Epistemology Farooqi's, but he was different from both of these. He was equipped with the intellectual firepower, coupled with the intellectual detachment required of an objective discourse to engage with the Western counterparts. To engage with the Western counterparts, this is one of the great, I should say, feats of Epistemology Farooqi. He was more than just an intellectual. He seemed earlier trying overzealously to promote Arab-centric views stemming from the Dr. Oroba, but he ventured subsequently beyond the straitjacket of such self-imposed philosophical confines. She was growing in this sense. He took dialogue to a universal level before even the term globalization was not known. People were not talking about globalization, but he was talking about universal dialogue with the people of other books. He was the precursor of dialogue among Abrahamic faiths, which graduated to civilizational dialogue, not among the Muslims and Christians and Jews, but among non-Muslims also. And then he engaged with the Buddhists and Hindus. It's a great lesson for us, especially in Indian context. But still we are not engaging in dialogue, we are engaging in polemics in the most cases. Or manazrabazi, we have many manazirs. But how many people who can engage with these non-Muslim scholars of religions at the academic level? We don't have much. We don't have many. Once upon a time we had Al-Biruni, and we had Mullah Musulmani, and we had other scholars in the Hazm and Shahristani. And in the western part of the world, at least we had Farooqi. But we have also Farooqi Sahib is our Professor Farooqi Sahib is also just Musul Osmani Sahib is just doing work on this in this field. But we don't have many people who could engage with these non-Muslim scholars at their own level. He was neither an armchair intellectual to be satisfied by writing books and articles, but was a practical statist and futurist visionary. Beyond Islamic knowledge, which he espoused, which is solely represented as his big field, his impact on the reunification of Islamic thought was more important, which led to the type of resurgence of Ijtihad, says Anwar Ibrahim. So this is a tribute by one of their colleagues, or I should say students, or whatever we call, because Dr. Manzoor Sahab knows Anwar Ibrahim, and he has a good association with all these luminaries. So, but no, he has given his personal viewpoint about Ismail Raji Farooqi after meeting him, and there was a great impact of Ismail Raji Farooqi on Malaysian educational system, and he was engaged by Anwar Ibrahim in different projects of education there in Malaysia. Anwar Ibrahim is right when he says that after the void left by the Department of Iqbal in the arena of engagement of the Muslim world with the West, it was Farooqi, Fazl Rahman, who were two important persons who engaged West. He says further, one stands to no avail to come up with any name close to this except probably Sayyid Nasr. And one person which can be also mentioned is Hussein Nasr. It was this conviction that led him to say that the pursuit of the worldly gain does not entail the abandonment of spirituality. So he also tried to say that if we are involved ourselves in these worldly pursuits, intellectual dialogue, education, and reformation of the Muslim world, so that is not anti-spirituality, because people thought that spiritual means to be away from the world and live in some cocoons without taking interest in the affairs of Muslims. But he said no, basic spirituality is this, that we have to engage ourselves in the reformation of our community. John Raines, a professor of Temple University, he said that West had a chronic suspicion, and that was removed by Ismail Raji Farooqi. And he says what Ismail Farooqi had been teaching about the importance, indeed the necessity for Muslims of Islamic knowledge. Knowledge is by nature a continuous field. He says that I was convinced by Ismail Raji Farooqi about the connection between power and knowledge. According to Foucault, he says power is knowledge. In so many words, I have just mentioned many things about that. So he says, I was studying those days, Raines, when I came into the circle of Ismail Raji Farooqi as a student, PhD student. I was reading those days, Foucault, what is the relationship between knowledge and power. And I was convinced that the Islam of knowledge theory, which was propounded by Ismail Raji Farooqi, was very apt. Because he had understood the relationship between power and knowledge, education. So he wanted to change their relationship through Islamic knowledge. And Raines says further, in certain sense, I had become a fellow traveler with Al-Farooqi. I have been taught and learned how important it is to get one's mind offshore from the global deals of power, to find other dialogue partners beside that famed Washington consensus and its intellectual defenders. Because there was one impulsion was from West that only scholarship is that, it was Islam, American Islam. Such an Islam was imposed on Muslims, which is American Islam. Good Muslim, bad Muslim. Mamdani might have gone through his book. So, a different type of category of Muslims, they are good Muslims because they are westernized, they are modernized. And those Muslims who are not westernized, modernized, they are bad Muslims. So this was relationship which was created by power and in the minds of the people. So it was Ismail Raji Farooqi who just tried to expose that type of relationship and with that type of understanding. One of the lessons taught by Ismail Raji Farooqi, he says that looking upon today's world, I see no source of shared action powerful enough to take on the powers that present in you apart from the eminence of the world religions. So a non-Muslim scholar, he was convinced that now the religions have to play a very important role in the world to make this a better place. So this is one of the very great contributions of Ismail Raji Farooqi, that he convinced the scholars of Christian world that we need to engage in interreligious dialogue. This is the journey that began when the young governor of Galilee was pushed out of his homeland and became a citizen of the world, from Galilee to Washington. So it was Ismail Raji Farooqi. He came to America to teach Americans, but also students from around the world. So what he taught about the real essence of Islam, Tawheed, interreligious dialogue, and how to get engaged about the reformation, and also how to get engaged about making this world a better place by dialogue, by understanding, by mutual concerns. Richard Martin from Arizona University calls him a gracious mentor. Some of the presentations of Farooqi were met with hostility, he says, and then he has given details about some of the orientalist biases against Ismail Raji Farooqi. But finally, Ismail Raji Farooqi was accepted as the authority by his adversaries. The Islamic Studies group began by Professor Farooqi drew many non-Muslim students and scholars as well, dozens of the Muslim protagonists from different parts of the world. And as Charles Adams has felt consternation that Farooqi was allowed to have strong control of the major American Academy Religious Animal Program unit devoted to Islamic Studies and had use of this for ideological purposes. So Ismail Haji Farooqi could convince people, and he made that department as a center of ideological, I should say, objectives. And even that was accepted by the people, although some of the people they had conversations. But because of his commitment, because of his hard work, people did not oppose that. But according to Martin, he was able to do that, but his senior colleagues like Campbell Sybil and Charles Adams could not do. And in this way, I have given almost all the views which have been presented by the people in the memoirs, first part of the book. And I found that this is one part, and at least there should have been 3 lectures on this, because we cannot take it personally. He is a great scholar, and his contribution is very immense. I think and all of us have some lessons in his life and his career. And we need to pursue that career of ourselves as academicians. And I find this only person, because we have studied all other scholars also, and we have been in touch with them. But I could not get any inspiration from anyone else than Ismail Haji Farooqi in modern times. If we want to do something, for the betterment of educational reform and educational, awakening of the Muslims, and also their understanding with other religions, and also to make a mark at the international level, Ismail Haji Farooqi has great lessons for us, and that has been accepted by his colleagues who were not necessarily Muslims, and who were his contemporaries, and some of his teachers, and some of his opponents in some ways. Al-Fazl Mashruda bin Ala, greatness is that which is being acknowledged by the enemies, not adversaries, not by the people who see eye to eye with you. So in this way, I think that this is the first part which I have done it here, and secondly, then I have just taken, I have seen the academic section where many papers have been presented by Anis Ahmad, Rashid Ahmad, and like India Just and other scholars of the world who had some association with the Ismail Haji Farooqi. And then I have just analyzed both articles. And in third part, I have tried to just give my own critical remarks about all these aspects. So, but here I just tried today confine because of the paucity of time. Some issues have already been brought up because of our main seminar which we had here last time. And even before that, there was a seminar lecture here also on Islam and knowledge 2 years back. So those aspects have been discussed. But the views of his colleagues, his contemporaries, and especially the people, scholars from the West who have made their mark, that was more important. So I think that there can be 2 more lectures on this. One lecture has to be on the second part of the book, that is the academic papers. So what has been written there? And there are some good papers by Ibrahim Zain, that is his views about ethics. And then there are some articles by Rains about his view about religions, and what is his new interpretation of old religion, and in different way. And third paper which has been written by Martin about his ethics. So how his ethical viewpoint is very much relevant to modern times. And there are other articles as such. So those all need to be discussed and debated in a different setting. And there we need to have some more deliberations on this. So, and finally, there needs to be an article where we can critically evaluate all those views and also see how far is the legacy of Ismail Haji Farooqi still very relevant to us, and how we can get benefit by his insights. Because he has worked in this world among the different communities of the world, and sometimes in the hostile atmosphere, but he has never compromised with his ideology or his belief or religious faith. And finally he was martyred, although there was no conspiracy. This was just bad luck, I should say, of the Islamic world and the world at large, that he was killed by the Africans, one African. And he was a new Muslim, but whatever the reasons, these are still not known. So, but whatever was, but he just attained martyrdom. So he was a martyred scholar of Islam in that sense. He, whole of his world life, he worked for Islam tirelessly, and finally he gave his life also for the cause of Islam. And his wife, Lamia Farooqi, she was also a wonderful scholar. She has been acknowledged by many his students as their mother. And the atmosphere which they have created at the home for the scholars and the students, that is worth emulating for all the teachers and scholars of Islamic studies and universities. So in this way, the legacy of Ismail Raji Farooqi as mentioned in this book, Islam and Knowledge by Imtiaz Yusuf. This is a very important collection, a great tribute to this great personality of modern times, which has, after Iqbal, filled the gap and wide, and even no one else could reach to that stature. And it was because of that reason that we have great universities of the world nowadays, the syllabus of which has been framed by him. But unfortunately, the syllabus which he had framed for Karachi Institute there, that could not be implemented, and he was compelled to go back to USA because he was not happy with the environment which we have in most cases, the conspiracies and just doing all these things. So he was very fed up with that. But then when he went west, there he established the center and brought people from different parts of the world and trained them in such a way who could become the real proponents of the Islamic knowledge. And then practically he made establishment of various Islamic universities possible, like Islamic University Malaysia, Islamic University Islamabad and Khartoum and other places. And there are triple IIT he just made himself, and the triple IIT is doing a wonderful job. And at last I will say this point, that this is the only alternative available to us as a student of modern Islamic thought and contemporary Islamic movements. I point that this is the only alternative available to us if we want to present Islam in a better way, and also to try to help our Muslim countries to come out from the morass and malaise they are in, educational backwardness, which has been given by Ismail Raji Farooqi. And this book is one of the greatest contributions of his bright student, that is Imtiaz Yusuf. And we need to study this book seriously and just take lessons from it, because this is a practical lesson we can get from it. It is not just a intellectual renders as we have in most cases. It's a practical lesson for us. With these words, I am very thankful to Dr. Manzoor Alam Saab and the Institute of Obstetrics and Professor Abdul Saab, Professor Musin Saab, and all my friends now know Professor Sanghvi Saab is also joined us, and my student Dr. Shaukat Saab and others there are present. So I think that this is a very, very important subject on which we need to have more and more deliberations, because this has something for us, stored for us in future if we really take Ismail Raji Farooqi and his legacy very seriously. Thank you very much. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।